The fastest way to lose the respect of the law is to forget that justice is supposed to recognize people before it judges them. Those words would echo through an entire courthouse before the morning was over. But at that moment, Officer Brandon Hayes had no idea they would soon describe his own greatest professional mistake. "Take the handcuffs off, right now." The command cut through the crowded courthouse entrance with unmistakable urgency. Every conversation stopped. Lawyers froze halfway up the marble steps. Court officers exchanged confused glances. A dozen people turned toward the white police officer standing beside a calm black man wearing a tailored navy blue suit. Brandon stared at his watch commander, unable to understand why the order had been delivered with such immediate authority. The man standing quietly before him had never raised his voice, never resisted a single instruction, and never once demanded special treatment. Instead, he simply looked at the commander with the same composed expression he had carried since the encounter began. For one long moment, nobody moved. Then the scene dissolved into silence as the image slowly faded into another time. 32 minutes earlier. The morning air outside the Jefferson County Courthouse carried the familiar sounds of downtown traffic, mixed with the footsteps of attorneys, clerks, jurors, and courthouse employees arriving for another busy day. The courthouse stood proudly beneath a clear blue Virginia sky, its broad stone staircase leading toward polished bronze doors where the seal of justice reflected the early sunlight. Brandon Hayes parked his patrol vehicle along the curb and began his routine security assignment outside the building. Courthouse mornings often required patience more than excitement. Most visitors simply passed through security before disappearing into courtrooms where judges, attorneys, and juries settled disputes according to the law. Brandon had worked this assignment dozens of times. Experience had taught him to notice unusual behavior before anyone else did. Across the street, a black luxury sedan eased into a legal parking space. A tall black man stepped out carrying a leather briefcase that appeared worn from years of daily use. His charcoal suit was perfectly pressed without appearing expensive enough to attract attention. He closed the car door carefully, adjusted his tie, and began walking toward the courthouse with quiet confidence. His name was Judge Nathaniel Brooks, although no one nearby seemed to recognize him outside the courtroom where he normally wore judicial robes instead of an ordinary business suit. Nathaniel preferred arriving without ceremony whenever possible. He believed respect should come from conduct rather than appearances. As he crossed the sidewalk, he paused briefly to greet an elderly courthouse maintenance worker by name before continuing toward the entrance. The simple exchange reflected genuine kindness rather than obligation. Brandon noticed the interaction from several yards away. Instead of seeing an experienced federal judge beginning another day of public service, he allowed quick assumptions to fill the gaps left by unfamiliarity. Something about Nathaniel's calm confidence caught Brandon's attention in a way he could not explain. As Nathaniel approached the bottom of the courthouse steps, Brandon stepped directly into his path. "Sir, I need you to stop for a moment." Nathaniel stopped immediately and offered a polite nod. "Of course, officer. How can I help you?" The courthouse cameras mounted above the entrance quietly adjusted their focus while Brandon's body camera and dashboard camera continued recording every word that followed, preserving a conversation neither man yet realized would soon become impossible to forget. Officer Brandon Hayes studied the man standing quietly before him, searching for something that justified the sudden feeling of suspicion that had settled into his mind. Nathaniel Brooks remained exactly where he had been asked to stop, holding his leather briefcase comfortably at his side, while the steady flow of courthouse employees continued moving around them. Several attorneys walked past without paying much attention, assuming the brief conversation was nothing more than routine security outside the courthouse. Brandon looked toward the identification badge, hanging from Nathaniel's jacket pocket. It remained turned backward, revealing only the clip instead of the information printed on the front. That small detail immediately caught Brandon's attention. "May I see your identification, sir?" Brandon asked. Nathaniel nodded politely. "Certainly, officer." He reached slowly inside his jacket and removed a leather credential holder. Before opening it, he paused. "I would appreciate it if you would verify my identity through the proper channels once you review it." Brandon frowned slightly. That sounds unnecessary, Nathaniel answered with the same calm voice. Verification protects everyone involved. Brandon accepted the credential holder and examined the driver's license first. The name read Nathaniel Brooks. The address was local. Nothing immediately appeared unusual, yet Brandon found himself expecting an explanation that never came. Instead of opening the second compartment containing official courthouse identification, he looked back at Nathaniel. "What brings you here this morning?" Nathaniel smiled politely. "I have business inside the courthouse." Brandon folded the credential holder without returning it. "What kind of business?" Nathaniel replied without hesitation. "Official business." Brandon interpreted the answer as evasive rather than professional. "I need something more specific than that." Nathaniel remained completely composed. "Officer, I am happy to cooperate. I simply believe your department should verify my credentials before we continue discussing them." Brandon crossed his arms. "You could save us both a lot of time by answering the question." Nathaniel's expression never changed. Sometimes taking a little more time produces the right result. Their quiet exchange began attracting attention. Two assistant district attorneys slowed their pace while climbing the courthouse steps. A court reporter glanced toward the conversation before entering the building. Near the entrance, a security officer watched from behind the screening station but chose not to interfere because Brandon was handling the situation. High above them, courthouse security cameras continuously recorded every movement across the front plaza. Brandon's body camera captured each word with perfect clarity, while the dashboard camera inside his patrol vehicle preserved a wider view of the entire entrance. Nathaniel noticed none of the cameras because he had long ago learned that professionalism should never depend upon whether someone was watching. Brandon handed back only the driver's license while keeping the credential holder in his other hand. "I am going to need dispatch to verify this." Nathaniel nodded once. "That is exactly what I was hoping you would do." Brandon walked toward his patrol vehicle, still convinced the situation required closer examination. Inside the cruiser, he entered Nathaniel's information into the mobile computer and requested verification through dispatch. Within seconds, the first records matched the driver's license exactly. Then the screen paused before displaying a secure notification requesting additional authorization to access employment information connected to the credential. Brandon stared at the message for several moments before reaching for his shoulder microphone. What had begun as an ordinary conversation outside the courthouse was quietly becoming something far more complicated than he had expected. Officer Brandon Hayes held the shoulder microphone near his mouth for a brief moment before pressing the transmit button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need credential verification associated with an official identification presented at the Jefferson County Courthouse." The dispatcher acknowledged the request immediately and asked him to stand by while the information moved through the verification system. Brandon lowered the radio and glanced back toward Nathaniel Brooks, who remained exactly where he had been asked to wait. His briefcase rested beside his polished shoes, and his expression reflected neither frustration nor impatience. Instead, he watched the steady stream of courthouse employees entering the building as though he fully expected the process to take whatever time it required. A pair of assistant clerks exchanged quiet whispers as they walked past, noticing that the well-dressed man remained outside instead of entering the courthouse. A deputy assigned to courthouse security observed the scene through the glass entrance but chose not to interfere. Brandon was the officer responsible for the contact, and there was no obvious sign of conflict. High above the courthouse entrance, multiple security cameras continued recording every second without interruption. Brandon returned to his patrol vehicle and looked at the mobile computer terminal once again. The secure notification had not disappeared. Instead, another message appeared beneath it requesting dispatch confirmation before additional information could be released. Brandon frowned. He had encountered restricted government records before, but never during what had begun as an ordinary security contact outside the courthouse. He pressed the transmit button once more. "Dispatch, I have a restricted response. Can you confirm whether additional verification is in progress?" There was a brief pause before the dispatcher answered. "Affirmative, Unit 12. Please remain on your current contact." We are completing credential verification through the appropriate channels. Brandon looked through the windshield toward Nathaniel. Copy. He released the microphone and stepped back onto the sidewalk. Nathaniel greeted him with the same composed professionalism. Has the verification begun? Brandon nodded. It is taking longer than expected. Nathaniel answered calmly. That usually means the system is making sure everyone receives the correct information. Brandon folded his arms. You seem very confident about that. Nathaniel offered a respectful smile. Confidence is not necessary when procedures are working. The answer left Brandon strangely unsettled. Most people became anxious when official verification lasted more than a few minutes. Nathaniel appeared almost relieved that dispatch had chosen to verify everything instead of accepting quick explanations. The courthouse clock mounted above the entrance chimed softly as another group of attorneys hurried toward the morning docket. One of them glanced toward Nathaniel with a puzzled expression before disappearing inside. Brandon noticed the look but dismissed it as coincidence. He still believed he was dealing with someone avoiding a direct answer. Inside dispatch, another verification request quietly moved beyond the county database and into a secure judicial directory. A supervisor reviewed the credential request before forwarding it to an authorized contact responsible for confirming protected judicial identities. Back outside the courthouse, Brandon remained unaware that the verification process had expanded well beyond his local department. Nathaniel adjusted his jacket slightly and looked toward the courthouse doors for only a moment before returning his attention to the officer. He never asked to leave. He never mentioned an important hearing. He never revealed his position. He simply trusted that the truth would arrive through the same legal process he had spent his entire career defending. As another notification tone sounded inside the patrol vehicle, Brandon turned quickly toward the computer, unaware that the next few minutes would begin changing the direction of the entire encounter. The notification tone echoed softly from inside Officer Brandon Hayes' patrol vehicle, drawing his attention back to the mobile computer terminal. He opened the driver's door and immediately noticed another secure message waiting on the screen. Instead of revealing the employment information connected to Nathaniel Brooks's credentials, the system displayed a single instruction requesting supervisory awareness before releasing any additional details. Brandon had never encountered that sequence during an ordinary courthouse assignment. He looked back toward Nathaniel, who remained patiently standing near the base of the courthouse steps, his leather briefcase resting neatly beside him. The calmness on the man's face was becoming increasingly difficult to understand. Most people questioned delays. Most people became frustrated when asked to wait. Nathaniel simply accepted the process without complaint, as though he trusted the system more than the outcome. Brandon stepped out of the cruiser and approached him again. The verification is still pending, he said. Nathaniel nodded politely. Thank you for letting me know. Brandon studied him for another moment. You do not seem concerned about being delayed. Nathaniel answered with quiet confidence. Justice depends on careful procedures, not fast ones. Brandon folded his arms. You speak like someone who spends a lot of time inside this building. Nathaniel smiled gently. You could say that. The answer sounded ordinary enough, yet it offered nothing Brandon believed was useful. Before he could ask another question, the courthouse doors opened and several attorneys hurried outside, checking their watches as they discussed the morning calendar. One of them glanced toward Nathaniel with visible surprise before quickly looking away and continuing across the plaza. Brandon noticed the brief exchange but assumed the attorney simply recognized a familiar face from previous legal proceedings. Nearby, courthouse security officers continued monitoring visitors entering through the screening station. None of them approached the situation because Brandon remained the primary officer handling the contact, and nothing about the encounter appeared confrontational. Above them, security cameras quietly adjusted their focus, capturing every angle of the courthouse entrance. Brandon's body camera continued recording every conversation, while the dashboard camera preserved the wider scene from the patrol vehicle. Across the street, a local news van waited outside another government building, its parked camera unintentionally pointed toward the courthouse entrance. No one present realized how many independent recordings were quietly preserving the same ordinary-looking morning. Brandon's shoulder radio suddenly crackled to life. Unit 12, dispatch. He immediately pressed the transmit button. Go ahead. The dispatcher's voice sounded more measured than before. Unit 12, your verification request remains active. Please maintain your current contact. A supervisory notification has been issued. Brandon frowned slightly. Can you clarify the reason? A brief pause followed. Negative. Additional verification is being completed through authorized judicial channels. Please remain on scene. Brandon acknowledged the transmission and slowly lowered the microphone. Authorized judicial channels. Those words lingered in his mind longer than he expected. He looked once more toward Nathaniel, whose expression remained composed beneath the morning sunlight. Nathaniel neither interrupted nor attempted to explain the dispatch message. He simply waited with the quiet patience of someone who had complete confidence that the truth would eventually arrive without being forced. Inside the county communications center, the verification request had already reached officials responsible for confirming protected judicial credentials. Telephone calls moved carefully between authorized offices. Every response matched the information already provided by Nathaniel, yet established protocol required one final confirmation before anything could be released to the officer standing outside the courthouse. Back on the plaza, Brandon still believed he was controlling the encounter. He did not yet realize that the process he had insisted upon was steadily leading him toward a truth far larger than any assumption he had made only minutes earlier. The quiet tension outside the Jefferson County Courthouse deepened as another minute passed without an answer from dispatch. Officer Brandon Hayes glanced repeatedly between the secure notification glowing on his patrol vehicle computer and Nathaniel Brooks, who continued waiting with remarkable patience near the courthouse entrance. The leather briefcase remained at his side. His suit was perfectly composed, and there was not the slightest sign of irritation on his face. He checked neither his watch nor his phone. Instead, he stood with the calm confidence of someone who understood that important decisions should never be rushed. Brandon walked toward him once again. I hope you understand this delay is unusual, he said. Nathaniel nodded politely. Some responsibilities deserve careful confirmation. Brandon looked directly at him. You still have not told me exactly what you do inside this courthouse. Nathaniel answered with the same measured tone. Officer, I have always believed that official records should introduce a person before personal claims do. Brandon sighed quietly. Most people would. Simply answer the question. Nathaniel offered a slight smile. Most people do not spend their lives protecting the integrity of legal procedures. Before Brandon could respond, the courthouse doors opened once again. This time, several administrative employees stepped outside carrying folders and speaking quietly among themselves. One woman suddenly stopped walking after noticing Nathaniel standing beside the patrol vehicle. Her expression changed for only a moment before she quickly continued toward another entrance, saying nothing. Brandon noticed the brief reaction but assumed she simply recognized someone scheduled to appear in court that morning. Across the front plaza, courthouse security officers exchanged brief glances while continuing their regular assignments. None of them approached because the encounter remained orderly, and Brandon still appeared to be conducting a routine investigation. High above the marble steps, security cameras silently followed every movement entering and leaving the courthouse. Brandon's body camera continued documenting every conversation, while the dashboard camera inside the patrol vehicle preserved a wide view of the entrance. Several passing citizens slowed just enough to observe the scene before continuing toward nearby government offices. To them, it appeared to be nothing more than another ordinary police contact. Inside the communications center, however, the situation had become anything but ordinary. The credential verification had now reached the administrative office responsible for confirming active judicial assignments. After reviewing the information, an authorized official immediately contacted the courthouse administration to verify one final detail. The answer returned within moments. A major criminal hearing was scheduled to begin shortly, and the presiding judge had not yet entered the building. Back outside, Brandon's shoulder radio suddenly came alive. Unit 12, dispatch. He answered immediately. Go ahead. The dispatcher spoke carefully. Unit 12, maintain your current location. Your watch commander has been notified and is responding to assist with the verification process. Brandon frowned. Is that necessary? There was a brief pause before the dispatcher replied. Affirmative. Please remain on scene until your supervisor arrives. Brandon acknowledged the instruction and slowly lowered the microphone. He looked back toward Nathaniel, who remained composed beneath the morning sunlight. It looks like my supervisor is coming, Brandon said. Nathaniel nodded once. Then the process is moving exactly as it should. Brandon searched the man's face again, hoping to find uncertainty or frustration, but there was only quiet dignity. At that very moment, several courthouse officials had already begun looking toward the entrance, wondering why the judge assigned to the morning's most important hearing had not yet walked into the courtroom. Without realizing it, Brandon was no longer delaying an ordinary visitor. He was delaying the one person the entire courthouse had been waiting to see. The sound of another patrol vehicle echoed through the courthouse plaza just as Officer Brandon Hayes lowered his shoulder microphone. A marked supervisor sport utility vehicle turned into the circular driveway and came to a smooth stop behind Brandon's cruiser. The emergency lights flashed only briefly before shutting off, drawing the attention of attorneys, courthouse employees, and several waiting jurors gathered near the entrance. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds stepped out with a calm expression, carrying a department-issued tablet and a portable radio. His measured pace suggested experience rather than urgency, but Brandon immediately recognized that dispatch had shared information he had not yet received. "Morning, Brandon," Reynolds said. "Bring me up to speed." Brandon explained the encounter from the beginning, describing the identification, the restricted credential response, the secure verification request, and the dispatch instructions requiring supervisory involvement. Reynolds listened carefully without interrupting. When Brandon finished, the lieutenant asked only one question. "Has this gentleman been cooperative from the moment of contact?" "Yes," Brandon answered without hesitation. "Completely cooperative." Reynolds nodded once before walking toward Nathaniel Brooks. Nathaniel stood exactly where he had remained throughout the encounter, holding his leather briefcase comfortably at his side. "Good morning, sir," Reynolds said respectfully. Nathaniel returned the greeting with a polite smile. "Good morning, Lieutenant." Reynolds continued in a professional tone. "Dispatch advised me that your credentials are still undergoing judicial verification. I appreciate your patience." Nathaniel inclined his head slightly. "I appreciate your department following the proper process." Before Reynolds could continue, his portable radio emitted a secure notification tone. Almost at the same moment, Brandon heard another alert from the computer inside his patrol vehicle. Reynolds glanced at the encrypted message appearing on his tablet before acknowledging a secure radio transmission that Brandon could not hear. His expression changed almost imperceptibly, not with surprise but with immediate recognition. He listened for several seconds before answering quietly. "Understood. Verification confirmed." Reynolds lowered the radio and turned back toward Brandon. "Officer, come with me for a moment." Brandon followed him several steps away from the courthouse entrance. Reynolds lowered his voice. "The identity has been confirmed through the Judicial Verification Office." Brandon waited for the rest of the explanation. Reynolds looked directly at him. "The individual you stopped is Judge Nathaniel Brooks. He is the presiding judge assigned to the major criminal hearing scheduled to begin this morning inside this courthouse." Brandon felt the meaning of those words settle over everything that had happened during the past half hour. He looked back toward Nathaniel, who had never argued, never raised his voice, and never once attempted to reveal his position to gain an advantage. Reynolds continued quietly. "Judge Brooks specifically requested that your department verify his credentials through official channels instead of accepting his personal statement." Brandon's eyes shifted toward the blinking indicator on his body camera, then to the courthouse security cameras mounted above the entrance, and finally to the dashboard. Camera still recording from his patrol vehicle. Reynolds noticed the movement. "Every significant moment has been documented," he said evenly. "That protects everyone involved." Reynolds then walked back toward Nathaniel and extended his hand. "Judge Brooks, Thank you for your professionalism and your patience. I apologize for the delay while we completed the required verification. Nathaniel accepted the handshake with quiet dignity. Lieutenant, procedures only have value when they are applied consistently. I appreciate your department allowing the process to reach the truth. Standing only a few feet away, Brandon realized that the man before him had never relied on his title, never expected special treatment, and never allowed authority to replace integrity. The truth had arrived exactly as Nathaniel had promised it would, not through assumptions or status, but through the careful process that justice itself was built to protect. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds remained beside Judge Nathaniel Brooks for another quiet moment before speaking into his portable radio. His voice was calm and precise as he confirmed that the judicial verification had been completed successfully and that the encounter outside the Jefferson County Courthouse was now entering its final stage. Dispatch acknowledged the update immediately, documenting the completion time before closing the secure verification request. Around them, the morning activity outside the courthouse slowly resumed, but the atmosphere had unmistakably changed. Several courthouse employees who had quietly observed the encounter now understood why the verification process had drawn so much attention. Brandon Hayes stood a few steps away, saying nothing as he watched Judge Brooks retrieve the credential holder that had remained in police possession throughout the verification. Nathaniel accepted it with a courteous nod, carefully placing it inside his jacket pocket without the slightest sign of resentment. He neither criticized the officer nor reminded anyone of his judicial authority. Instead, he simply ensured that every document had been returned before preparing to continue toward the courthouse entrance. Lieutenant Reynolds spoke again. Judge Brooks, I sincerely appreciate the professionalism you demonstrated this morning. Nathaniel smiled politely. Professionalism is easiest to recognize when it is tested. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. You never once identified yourself. Nathaniel answered without hesitation. Because titles should never replace procedures. If I expect every courtroom under my responsibility to respect due process, I should be willing to respect it myself. Those words settled quietly over the courthouse plaza. Brandon lowered his eyes for a brief moment before looking back toward the judge. Throughout the entire encounter, he had expected frustration, demands for immediate recognition, or an appeal to authority. Instead, he had witnessed patience, restraint, and complete confidence in the legal process. Nathaniel turned toward Brandon with the same calm expression he had maintained from the very beginning. Officer Hayes, he said gently, thank you for remaining professional throughout the verification. Brandon looked genuinely surprised. Judge, I should be thanking you for your patience. Nathaniel shook his head slightly. Patience is part of public service. Every person who wears a uniform or a judicial robe eventually learns that. Brandon hesitated before speaking again. I made assumptions before I had the facts. Nathaniel answered in a steady voice. Assumptions are human. What matters is whether we allow the facts to correct them. Nearby, several attorneys waiting to enter the courthouse quietly observed the exchange. None of them interrupted. The security officers standing near the entrance also remained silent, understanding that the most important lesson of the morning was unfolding without raised voices or dramatic confrontation. Above them, the courthouse security cameras continued recording exactly as they had since sunrise. Brandon's body camera remained active. The dashboard camera inside the patrol vehicle still preserved the wider scene. Every word spoken after the identity confirmation became part of the same complete record that had documented the encounter from its very first moment. Lieutenant Reynolds looked toward Brandon once more. After Judge Brooks proceeds inside, we will complete the required documentation and begin our administrative review. Every recording will be preserved according to department policy. Brandon answered quietly. Yes, Lieutenant. Nathaniel picked up his leather briefcase and looked toward the courthouse doors where court staff had begun waiting respectfully for his arrival. Before taking his first step toward the entrance, he offered one final thought. Justice is strongest when it protects the dignity of every person before it recognizes the position they hold. Without another word, he walked toward the marble steps as courthouse employees respectfully opened the entrance doors, leaving Brandon standing beneath the silent cameras, realizing that the greatest lesson of the morning had not come from authority, but from humility, patience, and unwavering faith in the process itself. Judge Nathaniel Brooks disappeared through the bronze courthouse doors only moments before the morning docket officially began. Inside the building, attorneys gathered their case files, jurors took their assigned seats, and court staff quietly resumed the rhythm of another day dedicated to the law. To everyone entering the courtroom, Judge Brooks appeared exactly as he always had, composed, prepared, and completely focused on the responsibilities waiting before him. No one inside the courtroom could have guessed that only minutes earlier he had been standing outside patiently waiting for his identity to be verified through the very legal process he had spent his career defending. Outside the courthouse, Officer Brandon Hayes remained beside his patrol vehicle as Lieutenant Michael Reynolds looked toward him with a calm but serious expression. "Once your shift is complete, report directly to headquarters," Reynolds said. "We will conduct a formal administrative review of the entire encounter." Brandon nodded quietly. "Yes, Lieutenant." Reynolds continued. "This is not a disciplinary meeting. It is a procedural review. Every significant contact involving protected judicial credentials is examined carefully. The recordings will allow us to evaluate every decision fairly." Brandon understood exactly what that meant. There would be no debate over memory. Every word had already been preserved. His body camera had documented each conversation from the first greeting until the final handshake. The dashboard camera had captured the broader scene outside the courthouse. Security cameras mounted above the entrance had quietly recorded every movement across the plaza. Even dispatch communications had been archived automatically within the department's digital record system. The evidence existed exactly as it happened. Later that afternoon, Brandon entered a conference room at department headquarters where Lieutenant Reynolds and two professional standard supervisors were already waiting. A large display screen showed synchronized recordings from the body camera, dashboard camera, courthouse security system, and dispatch timeline. The review began at the exact moment Brandon first approached Nathaniel Brooks outside the courthouse. Nobody interrupted the recordings. Nobody offered opinions while the videos played. They simply watched each decision unfold in chronological order. After the final recording ended, one supervisor quietly closed the case file and spoke with measured professionalism. "Officer Hayes, your communication remained respectful throughout the encounter, and Judge Brooks remained fully cooperative from beginning to end. Our review will now focus on whether assumptions influenced investigative decisions before sufficient facts were established." Brandon listened without attempting to defend himself. Watching the recordings from multiple camera angles revealed details he had completely overlooked while standing on the courthouse steps. Judge Brooks had consistently encouraged verification rather than confrontation. He had answered every question calmly. He had never attempted to use his position to influence the outcome. Lieutenant Reynolds spoke next. "The legal system depends on two equally important principles. Officers must verify facts before reaching conclusions, and public officials must respect the same procedures expected of every citizen. Today both principles were tested." Brandon slowly nodded. The lesson was becoming clearer with every minute. The recordings were not exposing a dramatic confrontation. They were revealing something far more important. They showed how quickly assumptions could shape perception, even when every opportunity existed to let the facts speak first. Before the meeting concluded, Reynolds gave one final instruction. "These recordings will remain preserved as part of the official review. They may also be used during future departmental training because they demonstrate why documentation, transparency, and procedural fairness protect everyone involved." Brandon left the conference room carrying far more than a completed report. For the first time since becoming a police officer, he fully understood that the most important witness during any encounter was never the loudest voice or the highest title. It was the complete and impartial record created when every action, every word, and every decision was allowed to speak for itself. Several weeks passed before the administrative review reached its formal conclusion, but the lessons from that quiet morning outside the Jefferson County Courthouse continued to resonate far beyond a single incident report. Every recording had been examined from beginning to end. Supervisors compared the body camera footage with the dashboard camera, courthouse security recordings, dispatch communications, and written reports. Each source confirmed the same sequence of events. The review found that Officer Brandon Hayes had remained respectful in his language and professional in his conduct. Yet it also concluded that assumptions had influenced his judgment before all available facts had been established. The department responded not with public embarrassment or unnecessary punishment, but with additional professional development focused on procedural fairness, implicit bias awareness, and decision-making based on verified information rather than first impressions. Brandon accepted every recommendation without objection. He understood that true accountability was not measured by pride but by the willingness to grow after recognizing a mistake. Months later, during a regional law enforcement training conference, Lieutenant Michael Reynolds presented the incident as an instructional case study. The names of everyone involved were withheld, but the recordings demonstrated how a routine encounter could quietly become an important reminder of the responsibility carried by every badge. New officers watched the footage carefully as instructors paused at key moments to ask a simple question. At what point should assumptions have given way to verified facts? The discussion that followed became one of the most meaningful sessions of the conference because the answer was never about one individual. It was about every decision made before certainty exists. On the other side of town, Judge Nathaniel Brooks continued presiding over his courtroom with the same steady dignity that had defined his career long before that morning outside the courthouse. He never spoke publicly about the encounter. He never sought attention or recognition. To him, the greatest victory had never been the confirmation of his title. It had been watching the legal process function exactly as it was designed to function. Verification replaced speculation. Documentation replaced opinion. Facts replaced assumptions. During a community event several months later, Brandon unexpectedly saw Judge Brooks again. After the program concluded, Brandon approached him with quiet respect. "Your Honor," he said, "I wanted to thank you for something." Nathaniel smiled warmly. "For what?" Brandon answered honestly. "For allowing the process to teach me instead of letting the moment define me." Judge Brooks looked at him for a thoughtful moment before replying. "Every day the law gives us another opportunity to become better servants of the public. The important thing is that we accept the lesson when it arrives." Brandon nodded, understanding those words in a way he never could have months earlier. As they shook hands, there was no audience waiting to applaud and no cameras searching for dramatic headlines. There were only two public servants who had both chosen to let integrity guide them after an unexpected test. The courthouse behind them stood exactly as it always had, its marble steps welcoming. Every person who entered without asking about appearance, profession, or status. The law inside those walls demanded only truth supported by evidence, and the events of that unforgettable morning had quietly reminded everyone involved that justice cannot recognize uniforms before character, assumptions before facts, or authority before humanity. Because in the end, the strongest badge is not worn on a uniform, the highest title is not engraved on a courtroom door, and the greatest measure of justice is found in the courage to let truth speak before judgment ever does.